Welcome back to another Monday lunch break discussion, just a little unscripted talk about what we've been doing this week, what we plan on doing, what we've been thinking about, and I try to offer you a little tip or technique. This week we're going to discuss easy go-to finishing methods I use for most of my projects nowadays, and that kind of stuff. This week I'm still roughing out that tree we harvested about 2 weeks, and I'm kind of entering the frustrating stage. What I'm talking about when I'm roughing something out is I will stick a rough bowl on it, and if it's big enough that I can core out a secondary bonus bowl, I will do that one. But the idea is to get it very even thickness all the way through, plus a little foot, some way of attach it. If I'm coring something out, I'm generally going to put a recess in here because I find it grips a little bit better. I have torqued off tenons before. And then I try and paint the end grains. You can see I paint the inside and outside. That way most of the moisture content will be leaving through the long grain. It'll slow it down. From here I will stick this up in my attic up there for 6 months to a year, and then we will either finish turn it or we'll turn it one more time and come it down. The general thickness you go for, the rule of thumb, is 10% of the total width. So if you got a 10-inch bowl, you want to get about an inch down here. I have found that on certain species you can go thinner, on other species you can go thicker. Pecan, at least this particular tree, that's one of the frustrating things I find in wood turning is it's different from tree to tree. You think it's different from species to species, but it comes down to tree. When you harvest it and that kind of stuff, basically how much water was in it to begin with. I am finding most of these pecans that I've been harvesting the past 2 weeks, I probably should have turned them a little bit thinner, because already about a quarter of the ones I've roughed out have cracked to the point where they're now trash. This one right here, I'm getting a crack along the base right there. I think it might be savable, but I won't know. I'll find out about in 6 months. I am getting to the kind of frustrating part of it, because again, we harvested this tree about 2-3 weeks ago, and as best as you can prep it, until it's roughed out, you're going to get some waste, some crackage, and I'm to the point now that about 1 in every 3rd bowl is just trash. Here's a good example. This is a piece of walnut I've had for a while, and it started out as a nice 12-inch bowl, something I could get $80 for, given the amount of time I spend in doing it for a utilitarian bowl. But there were some minor cracks on the outside, something not that big a deal. But it's different from every bowl. Sometimes a little crack like that, no big deal. You go in an inch, it disappears. But think about it. If you got a 12-inch bowl and you go in 1 inch, well, that bowl is now 10 inches because it comes down twice. So all of a sudden, your nice 12-inch bowl is a lot smaller, so you're not going to be able to charge as much at farmers markets and stuff like that. But it requires more work because you had to come down that crack. So this 12-inch bowl, I came down, and then the crack needed to come down a little bit more, so I came in another inch, so I lost basically 4 inches so far. And yet that crack was still there, but it wasn't all the way through. I started diving through, so I started shaving it off, until I get basically a worthless UFO that's still got this stupid crack in it. So I now have maybe 45 minutes into turning this thing, another hour harvesting it, and it is basically fodder in my trash can. Yes, missed. Another one. That one I worked on this morning. Here's another one I worked on this morning. I finally got to the point where all the cracks were gone, and then I went in another ½ inch. Guess what popped up? A little bark inclusion. That bark inclusion had another crack within it. So it was cracking on the inside. Once again, you never really know, but when I say that I'm getting down to the frustrating point is because now that the wood has started drying enough, those uncertainties start popping up. And it's not like working flat work where even though it might warp or cup or something like that, you can deal with it. If you get a crack, it's trash. My dad, let's throw some epoxy into it, let it sit for a while. Well, that's adding another hour or 2 of labor into it. You can add turquoise to cracks, that kind of stuff, but are you going to get your money back out? And when I say I'm getting frustrated, sometimes it's that in my back of my head, I'm seeing here, well, every hour I spend on this is less income I'm making. I'm putting more labor into it, and I'm not going to be able to sell it for any more money. So at some point, you just kind of have to trash it and grab something else. And that's kind of where I'm getting to this point in the pile. I've got a good 40 bowls up there, another 10 green finished ones in my little gallery. But when you started out with 60 and 80, yeah, there's a lot of waste going on. Last week I was talking about I was having problems with my finish on the milk paint. Well, basically that was the first day and I couldn't figure out why it wasn't drying fast, because shellac normally dries really fast. So today I'm going to talk about my go-to finish. I'm going to explain what was going wrong. Basically it came down to this little jar right here. My shellac had gone bad. Even though I'd only bought this thing about 3-4 months ago, something went wrong with it and it just went bad, so it was not fully curing. So that was the problem I was having. Now you can see I've got my go-to shellac bottles right here. This is straight Zinsser shellac. It comes in about 3 to 1, and you can see this is bad, but I wanted you to see that you gotta mix it up because it kind of settles out. You mix your shellac with alcohol, and there you go. What I use most often is a 1 pound cut. And how do I get a 1 pound cut? Well, I'm not going to mix flakes. That's too much work for me. I will simply buy this seal coat stuff, which comes as a 2 pound. Fill up half the bottle with alcohol, half the bottle with this stuff, and I got my 1 pound cut. This is what I use most often, and I'll do a demonstration with it in a second showing you how I use it, just because it's fast, easy, and it gives a good, nice, next to the wood finish that doesn't feel like a film. Sometimes I will go straight, I will add a last 2 pound cut, which is just this stuff straight from the can, and then we got our 3 pound right here. The other go-to finish I have is just straight walnut oil, and if I'm ever doing a salad bowl or something that's going to be really eaten out, basically my utilitarian bowls or utilitarian surfaces, this is the finish I go to. It takes a couple days to fully cure, but that's okay for that kind of work. And almost all the time on my turnings, I will put a little beeswax on the top of it. On my flat work, my furniture, on top of these, I will add some kind of paste wax. And my favorite is this little citrus shield for no other reason than I like the smell. It smells like oranges. The bad thing about this one is I'm finding is this is really the first time I've worked out of this warehouse, and because it's a metal warehouse and that's not very well insulated, there's not very much air movement. When it's 90 degrees outside, it's a little bit over 100 in here. I'm finding that most of my paste waxes are almost turning to liquid at that temperature, so I'm having to keep them in the refrigerator just to keep them solid to put on my work. So, y'all ready to see a little demonstration on using shellac on your finishing? Come on. What I have right here is a little elm bowl. This came out of San Marcos. I've got a little tenon on the back. This is going to be the back side and that'll be the front side. Obviously, I haven't hollowed it out yet. This is how I rough turn work. I've got this one on a little screw chuck that's held, the screw is actually held in my vise. I mean, yeah, the screw is held in my chuck just to make things faster. And this is generally how I rough turn stuff that's around 10 inches. Anything bigger than that, I don't really trust the screw chuck. It's not that long. It's a little one-way setup. From there I would use 2 live centers. And I pretty much always keep the live center on the back, even with my screw chuck, just to maintain stability, because I do like to turn these things fast. I am trying to get them done quickly. So what I'm going to show you is how I use the shellac finish, and then after I flip it and haul out the inside, I will show you how I use the oil and wax finish. This is a bowl I am turning green, so I'm not going to let it sit up in the attic, which means I've got to turn it really, really thin so that as it warps and moves, there is not as much pressure, so there's less chance of it cracking. I lose about 1 in maybe 10 of these to cracking, but they do have a kind of a nice warped look to them when they're done. This elm came from San Marcos in the downtown area of San Marcos. It's got a little pink in it and stuff like that, which is kind of cool. Okay, so real quickly what I've done is I've sanded it down to about 220 grit, starting at 120, 180, and then going to 220. So it's fairly smooth right now, but being elm, it still does have its open pores. I didn't find any tear out. That's generally just to scuff it up a little bit. If I can, I will go straight from a blade, but that's not always possible. And normally if I'm applying shellac, I will sand it to about 220. I use shellac on bowls that are more decorative, or on the stuff like I've added milk paint to. And I've been doing the entire milk paint series on this one. I probably should put milk paint on this one, but just for today's little demonstration, this will be fine. So what I've got is my 1 pound cut, which was 50/50 of the seal coat, Zinsser seal coat. It's a new jar. I am going to show you how to fix a shellac mistake by using that bad stuff in a second. But I want to show you how to make a fairly nice finish, and we're going to use shellac as a little bit of a core filler. I pretty much use 1 pound for just about everything because I find it soaks into the wood a little bit better than the straight from the can seal coat, but you do have to apply it on more coats. What you're going to see me do is my technique. It's kind of sloppy, but it seems to work okay. And I'm going to leave the camera running so you can see how long it takes to dry. I only wait about five minutes, if that long, in between coats. So I like to use these foam disposable brushes. With shellac, I will just leave it in a little jar, and I'll use the same brush all day long for my shellac and just toss it at the end of the day. I mean, they're only about 35-40 cents if you buy them in bulk, so it's not that big a deal. I got my 1 pound shellac. Shake it up before you use it. Pop the top. And because it's 1 pound, I don't worry about it. I will just lay my brush down and I'll just give it a little squirt. And just kind of keep a wet edge. And just don't worry about how much you're putting on. It'll soak in. Most of what we're doing right now is alcohol, so it's going to evaporate pretty fast. You can already see it's almost evaporated on that side right there already. So if I let that sit for a couple minutes, I'll come back, do a quick sand, and then work it over. I'm going to let this, normally I let it spin, but just so that you can see it dry, I'm going to turn it off, and I'll come back in a few minutes and I'll time lapse it. Okay, that was roughly 2 minutes, and it's already dry. So I'm going to put another coat on, just turn it spinning, and this same technique works for flat work. I'll do the same exact thing, except that I'm moving the brush that time. And just drizzle it on and let it soak in, just like that. Okay? Okay, that was about 2 minutes again. It's dry, it's not tacky to the touch. And I've got my 320 grit sandpaper right here, so I'm just going to quickly do a quick sanding. And I want you to notice something. The sawdust is actually a white. That's actually the shellac. It's not the wood anymore. So I just roughed it up with sandpaper. And you can see it's kind of a dull white. Now this time I'm going to actually apply the shellac with some 320 grit sandpaper. And that's going to create a slight slurry that'll fill any pores that I have there. Same technique, just kind of dribble it on. Keep working it in. As long as your sandpaper is wet, it'll keep flowing on. And it's not going to look pretty this time. But as soon as that dries, all that sawdust will fill in any pores, and we'll do a last sanding and apply the last coat. Okay, that's enough time that I just went and washed my hands and came back, and it's not tacky anymore. And you can see it's a little bit duller. You don't see that shellac shine because it's mixed in with sawdust. So a quick sanding with 320 grit. Actually, I'm going to use 220 grit. This will knock it back down to the ports. Now that first few coats basically got soaked in so that the later coats didn't have to soak in as far, so that the sawdust would fill the pores. And now we have something that is really has a nice tactile finish to it. Let me sand that right there a little bit more. I burned through right there a little bit, but no big deal. Okay, for kicks we'll use the 2-pound stuff this time. This is just straight out of the can. And when it's my little balls are full like this, basically all you have to do is tilt it over a little bit and 1 or 2 drops. Just shake it up before you do anything. And once again, my little tiny foam brush. Just lay it down, drizzle a little shellac on. Just keep your surface wet. And you end up with a nice film finish. What I like about shellac is when at these lower pound cuts, it's got so much alcohol in it, the alcohol acts kind of like a flattener, and you don't really end up with brush marks, even if you're using a bristle brush. Okay, that was just about enough time for me to go to the restroom, and you can look at that. Nice, smooth finish. Very few brush marks at all. And basically, the last thing I would do to this is I would use a little Scotch-Brite pad and wax and kind of buff out, and that wax would take any lines that were present, they'd buff those out, and the wax would give it a nice matte finish. I'll do that after I do the interior. But I want to show you something real quick. So that last one was a 2-pound cut, and this is a 3-pound cut, straight from the Zinsser Bullseye Shellac. I know this stuff has gone bad. It will not cure. It isn't the alcohol that's gone bad, it's the actual shellac. It don't want to stay mixed up in normal atmosphere for a little while. That's why most shellac cans have an manufacture date, so you can know how long they'll be good. I honestly only bought this can, I want to say 2-3 months ago. It went bad pretty fast, but it did stay open. The can was mostly empty when I filled this little jar up. So I'm going to apply this on. I'm going to flash it off. I don't really recommend flashing shellac off now. I flash dyes all the time, but if you flash off shellac, it kind of gets a little wrinkle finish. But with a 3-pound cut, that's okay, because if you sand it back, that wrinkle finish goes away. So it's a quick way to do it. And remember, once the alcohol is gone, the shellac is dry. So I've already shaken the can up, and I apply it the same way. Just kind of drizzle it on, keep a wet edge. And it is noticeably thicker going on. The heavier cut has less alcohol in it. That's more shellac. Flash it off real quick. Now this is dry. Okay, the alcohol's gone, but there's still gumminess to it. And when shellac is bad, it will get to this kind of gummy, soft, you feel like you can push it, your fingerprint shows up in its stage, and it will never get any better. So in fact, I've screwed up. Here's what's nice about shellac. It's somewhat reversible. Because shellac dissolves in alcohol, all you really need to do is get some denatured alcohol, a little rag, soak the rag in it, and just remove all the shellac off the top layer. It just comes right off. You might have to use several pieces of that rag because a certain portion of that rag will have already absorbed some of the shellac, and just let it absorb off into your rag. The denatured alcohol will just re-soften it, and you just take it off. And once you got the old shellac off, put on your good shellac. Simple as that. I'm basically reversing all the work I just did. But we are back down to the unshiny finish. So I'm going to go back and put my 1 pound cut on it. I'm going to flip it, carve out the interior, and I will show you my second go-to style of finishing using oil and wax. Okay, so here's my second go-to style of finish. It's just oil and wax. Fairly simple. You can do this on box tops, just about anything. I've turned the inside out, and I'm about 1/4 of an inch to probably 1/8 of an inch on bottom. This is not perfect. You see there's a little tear out right there because I find that whenever I turn these green things, because it's still wet and still flexible, on these outside, when I go to finish it with a scraper, there gets to be a little cadence in there. It kind of vibrates, the wood vibrates. So I always seem to get a little bit of tear out right in the middle of the bowl, kind of that one transition. And what I found is I sand it smooth. I sand that low spot a little bit, but it's going to show up when it's in the raw form. So here we go. I got my oil. I am using walnut oil because you can buy it in the olive oil section of your grocery store. It's cheap. And this is actually a little bit more traditional than something like linseed oil. I don't know why it's not more popular or more people don't talk about it. Walnut oil is one of the only natural oils that will fully cure. So it makes a great finish oil. I just soak a little rag in, a paper towel in it. And I'll turn my lathe on. And just apply it for about a minute. Then wipe off what doesn't soak in. I'm not putting very much on, just to get in that top layer of wood, change its color, to hide any tear out. Nothing spectacular here. And you can see I'm just dabbing it on. Just getting the surface slightly wet so that I see its own reflection. I will turn it off, make sure I hit any spots with a little bit of tear out, but notice that center section, you don't really see it anymore. It's there somewhere, I just don't know where. The oil really does cover it up well. Now the oil is still wet, so you really shouldn't be able to do much with it. I'm going to put the cap back on. Remember these little rags, lay them out to fully dry. Don't just put them in with sawdust or something like that, because they will go boom. So I'll take another dry piece and I'll crank the speed up, and I'm going to add some heat. And so the heat will help set the oil and cure it just a tad bit. It's not going to be fully cured, but that's okay. I know a lot of people will make their own mixtures of oil and wax. Well, what I'm about to do is just do that right on the piece. I have a piece of beeswax right here. I'm going to apply it, and you can do this with flat work too. All I'm doing is putting a little small amount on it. Now I've also got shellac on the outside, so I'm going to take that same piece of paper and I'm going to burnish the outside. Got the outside burnished. And the inside has a wax on it, so I crank the speed up. I'm going to melt the wax into the top layer of the wood, so it's going to mix with that oil. So I get my own oil and wax mixed. And you'll see paper fly off because it just shreds this stuff, but it's just sitting on the surface, so it'll wipe off. And there we go. The interior of this bowl is now more than food safe. Of course, shellac is food safe too, but it's got a nice matte finish to it that most people seem to like. And I don't know what it is about the wax. I'll put the wax on the outside too, right over the shellac. It seems to be a matte finish, and people just like the feel of the wax better than anything else. There we go. So I'm going to turn the base off, and then we'll have a finished bowl. So there we go, finished bowl. You can see the oil on the inside is a little bit matte, but the wax adds a little bit of the sheen to it compared to I just put oil on the bottom. And you can see it is a lot flatter looking. It's the wax that gives it a little bit of sheen. Then we have a 2-pound cut of shellac on the outside. You can see it gives it a little bit of gloss. I don't like going higher than 2 pounds simply because it gives it a plastic feel to me. At least this feels like wood still, even though it's got a little bit of a shine to it. Can you see that? There you go. Whereas the interior is somewhat matte. So there you go. One bowl, oil and wax, a fast and easy finish. Shellac and wax, a fast and easy finish. Yes, I have a little bit of beeswax on top. And then just straight oil on the bottom. 3 of my go-to finishes. If I need to, I can go back and reapply a little bit of oil, even to the shellac portion. It will absorb through. But this is it. It's fast and quick. And it kind of goes back to what I was frustrated with earlier today. Spending a lot of time on something that you're really only going to get 40 or 50 bucks for at a farmer's market or something like that. You don't need to spend a whole lot of time. The customers will be really happy. And you'll make a little bit more money. You'll be a little bit more productive. Well, I hope you got something out of this little discussion. It's unscripted, probably dragged on a little bit too long, but I'll try and keep them up. And I want you to remember one last thing. It's always worth the effort to learn something, create new things, and share them with others. Y'all be safe and have fun.